All right, today it was announced by our friends at ESPN with a very nifty infographic that Ohio State has finally caught Georgia in the betting market, Matt DeBerry. I want to just say this real quick to just factually speaking. This is the only, I follow this pretty closely. ESPN right now is the only place that has them even. Everyone else has Ohio State slightly behind or behind Georgia. But Matt, today someone must have taken a pretty big bet at ESPN for Ohio State to be the co-favorite. The graphic for ESPN says for the first time since January, Georgia is not the outright title favorites.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan. Ryan said in another video he still thinks Georgia's the best team in the country, and I agree there. But Ohio State is a really good team, and I think we've all talked that in the past that the quarterback is a little bit of a question mark. The right side of the offensive line is a little bit of a question mark, but they are loaded defensively. They've got weapons all over the place. If we're comparing position groups, I would take Georgia's quarterback. I'd take Georgia's offensive line. I'd take Georgia's tight ends. But I would definitely take Ohio State's running backs and wide receivers. And then defensively, I'd probably take their secondary as well. I'd take Georgia's linebackers. And then the defensive line is probably up for debate. That might be 50-50. But we talk about Georgia being very deep and a lot of position groups. We've talked about it all offseason, right? For good reason, because it's true. Ohio State definitely has a lot of talent, especially at the skill positions. They've got running backs. They're always good defensively. They're well coached. They're going to be a really, really tough team. They're going to be a problem. And I do think that they have a lot of pressure on them. We talked about that a lot, Ryan. Ryan Day has a lot of pressure. This might be the year that they need to get it done, because I look up and down their roster. They're full of talent, and they are deep at a lot of position groups too. This probably needs to be the year.
And we talked about the only question mark really being Will Howard, the quarterback. It's kind of like the 49ers almost, right? They're stacked everywhere, and then they plop quarterback in there, and they do really well. I imagine Will Howard's going to be good enough to lead them to potentially a 12-0 regular season. I think that their path is not as difficult as Georgia's when you look at their schedule. Their toughest game being at Oregon, most likely. I don't think they're losing to Michigan 4 times in a row. I think they get back on track this season, especially with that being back in Columbus. But their entire year is just not as tough as Georgia's. And, is that going to affect them in a different way? I just think mentally the path that Georgia has is tougher. I don't know if that affects odds that much. I don't know if that affects the odds that much. But to me, you would look at Ohio State's roster, you look at Georgia's roster, and I view them very, very evenly. It's like I say, just pick your poison with some of the position groups. But Georgia's odds are still better than Ohio State's, even though, you can totally make the argument that Ohio State's a better football team. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's dumb or that's just a terrible argument. But the quarterback, it does come down to the quarterback a little bit. I think that both of these teams are going to have really good defenses and really good skilled position groups. But I think that the quarterback thing matters. But I don't know. I'm a little surprised that Georgia's odds have been number one this entire time with what we do know about Ohio State.
Oh, because of Ohio State.
Because of Ohio State. I do. I look at the path and I just say, well, the only game that I really think they might lose is at Oregon. And with Georgia, you could say that for about 3 games.
Yeah, so I think it can't be about the regular season to me because of how much leeway you have now. Does anyone here think that Ohio State or Georgia is not getting into the
playoff? They should both get in.
They'll both get in. Right. And so then it comes down to, although I agree with whoever said, at Oregon, that's going to be a challenging game for Ohio State. But they certainly could win that game. They play at Oregon, at Penn State, and they play Michigan. All the rest of these games, Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, Michigan State, Iowa, Nebraska, Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, those games are jokes. Those are not serious games. And so, and then I guess they would play the Big Ten Championship again against presumably Oregon. Losing the Big Ten is not going to knock you out of it. It won't give you Pasadena. So then I would imagine, in theory, Ohio State would probably play at the Fiesta Bowl, but they may well play in Atlanta. I'm not sure. But the path completely matters, y'all. It makes a big difference in terms of I mean, Georgia's got a slew of games they could lose, Matt.
Yeah. And talk about Ohio State, they don't get Wisconsin, who I think will be better. They don't get Penn State. We laugh about Penn State because they make it easy for us to laugh at them, but they're clearly more talented than the Northwesterns and the Indianas and the Iowas and the Michigan States. So those are two respectable opponents. They don't get the USC Trojans, Ryan. It is an easier path. They've got to get it done, but they returned 15 of 22 starters. They returned 9 starters on defense. And we talk a lot about returning production. Guys coming back, experience matters a whole lot, especially in a season that's going to be extended. And you're going to need those leaders and those experienced guys, especially when playoff time comes around. And a lot of these guys, I mean, basically all of them, have seen a bad loss, whether it's to Michigan 3 years in a row or to Georgia 2 years ago. They all know heartbreak, and they all have some revenge on their mind. And I do think that the Ohio State, the people in the program, the fans, they all kind of feel like a special season is just right in front of them. And do they have the quarterback or not, like Ryan's mentioned? Maybe it's a question mark because we don't know. But they're going to have an opportunity to go deep in the playoff and make a real run. But they might have to get past Georgia if they want to win that final game of the season.
Yeah, their running back duo they're both NFL running backs. And when's the last time we saw two in the same backfield that are that good? Do you have to go back to Nick Chubb and Sony, or has it been somewhere in between?
There. Yeah.
I mean, if they can rely on that running game to an extent, Will Howard's job's not going to be – they're not going to ask him to do as much as C.J. Stroud or Justin Fields or maybe even Kyle McCord last year. So that part, you talk about all the returning talent, and then you add Quinshon Judkins to one part of it, and then you add Caleb Downs to the backside of their defense. I mean, they're a scary football team. If Will Howard's really good, they're going to win the national championship.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it.
Well, I think, look, for Georgia, the problem for both these teams is one of them will probably be in the way. Lately, Ohio State's only been in the way once for Georgia. So, Ohio State's problem's been Michigan. Will they figure that out? If they don't, I was listening to First Take this morning talking about the pressure on Ryan Day, and there's significant pressure on Ryan Day, and there has been significant pressure on Ryan Day, and I don't know that that's going to change this season, y'all. I mean, the guy lost to the backup head coach at Michigan. He lost to a guy at Michigan who had been sputtering for, 7 seasons, six for a while with Jim Harbaugh. And there's a lot of doubt about Ryan Day. And I really feel like he'll win the national championship. I just don't know that it's going to be this season. It doesn't always line up the way that you think it will or you hope it will. There are some other – Oregon's going to be a real problem for Ohio State. I want to add this. The non-winner of the SEC. So the team that is in the SEC championship game that does not win, they will not go to the Sugar Bowl. They will be in Atlanta. They will have to play an extra game to get there, but they will be in Atlanta almost certainly the way that I read it. So there's some advantage there too.
Yeah. If you win the SEC, you absolutely earned it because you beat a lot of good teams in the regular season and you beat a really good team in that championship, Brian. So, and again, if you win the SEC, you should be number one. You should have the number one seed and have the easiest path after that. Even if you have one loss throughout the way, but I do think it might come down to these two teams. Maybe Texas, I think, has a shot. They've got some really good players. I don't think they're as deep as Georgia and Ohio State. Oregon has a 23-year-old quarterback in Dylan Gabriel who's going to light it up. I think age definitely matters at the quarterback spot. So they're a sleeper team. Outside of those four, I don't see Alabama winning it all. That would be something. That'd be one of the crazier stories. First-year head coach coming down there winning it all. But I can't see another team outside of Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon to bring this thing home this year.
Yeah, and they might get in each other's way before a national championship. It might play out where Georgia doesn't win the SEC or Ohio State doesn't win the Big Ten, and all of a sudden they're playing each other earlier in the bracket. Yeah. And even if they are the two best teams, we've seen over and over the 4 team was flawed. It had its flaws. it's going to happen the same way here with 12 teams. It's just going to be on a little bigger scale. It's not always going to be who the majority thinks the two best teams in college football, ending up in that final spot. They both are similar where it seems like it kind of feels like an Ohio State Georgia thing, and then it's like you said, Oregon and Texas right below them. They both have to deal with that other one, but it's which team can grind it out in December and January. That's what it's going to come down to. They're both going to make it. It's going to come down to the coaching and the preparation in those later months. Yeah. And we know that Georgia's got the best of that right now.
Yeah, what Matt said too. And let me expand just for a moment here. Hey, Matt said health, and he's right. I mean, you look at that certainly hurt Georgia a season ago. But in terms of talking about playing in the Peach Bowl, if you're a non-champion, that means you can't play in the Sugar Bowl unless there's a slight possibility that the non-SEC champion could play in the Sugar Bowl. That would only be a situation where the Big 12 team is the number 1 overall seed. No one thinks Arizona is going to be the number 1 seed. So the ACC champion is either going to play at the Peach Bowl as the number 1, or they're going to, I don't even know if they can choose to go to the Fiesta Bowl, but like if they're playing Georgia or Alabama or any SEC team, they're going to want to avoid playing in Atlanta. Am I wrong? I mean, no. There are some inherent advantages to just the locality of these games, which is something the Big Ten has complained about, quietly. But nonetheless, I mean, I think, the betting market is it's probably going to go between 3 teams, I would imagine. It won't be Oregon. It'll be Texas, Ohio State, or Georgia. And a loss for any of them is not necessarily going to sidetrack that. The way they play might. But we're just going to have to see. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.